I'm Linda Campbell from the Horizon Center School of Hypnotherapy. Thank you so much for your interest in this webinar. Today, we're going to talk all about depth, mostly about how depth is irrelevant as far as getting results with a client is concerned, and how you can work with the majority of the people you'll see who are people who tend to stay a little bit lighter. So let me share my screen, and we will jump right into the material. So again, we're going to talk about how to work with the 90% of the clients who tend to stay light. If you have any questions or you want to reach out, I'm going to be offering you some scripts and techniques that you can use to work with a client who stays lighter. So you're welcome to reach out to me at info@horizoncenterhypnotherapy.com or check out my website. There are other resources there that might be useful to you. And so let's just jump right into the material. Now, in order to, the plan, pardon me, I'm going to share with you a little bit of background so you understand why I'm going in the direction that I'm going in. We're going to talk a bit about why depth is irrelevant and can even be counterproductive, trying to get them super deep. And as I said, I'm going to give you some tips and ideas as to how you can work with a client who stays lighter. And there's some time at the end if you have any questions. So let me share a little bit of background with you. Now, this is pretty standard for hypnotherapy training. I was basically taught to get the client as deep as I could possibly get them and then tell them what to do, give them suggestions. So it really looked like the client just kind of laying there passively in the chair while I read a script to them. And I was never really that comfortable with this approach to hypnosis, mostly because I felt like I wasn't getting good enough results. First off, not everybody would go that deep. I had one client who said she felt really uncomfortable that I was trying to get her deeper and deeper. It interfered with the rapport that we had. And just reading scripts to them when they were in hypnosis felt like I was being lazy. And again, I wasn't getting the results that I wanted to see. And so I was never really comfortable with this approach, but I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't trained to do anything different. I didn't know what I didn't know. Until I had my very first weight loss client. Thank goodness this woman came along because she changed how I do hypnosis and it's informed how I teach my students as well. So this was a classic situation. This woman came to see me wanting to lose weight, and she basically said that she wanted to eat smaller portions. And so based on her instructions for the first couple of sessions, I did the standard, you eat only when you're hungry, you eat smaller portions, you're satisfied with a smaller amount. At this point now in my career, I don't even know how I filled the hour with her, just telling her, eat smaller portions, eat smaller portions. Well, after our second session, when she came back for the third one, she reported that not only was she not eating smaller portions, she was actually gaining weight. Now, obviously, this was not the result that the client or myself wanted, and I wasn't trained where to go next. You know, my training kind of taught me that if the client isn't following suggestions, it's because the client doesn't really want the results. I don't agree with that. I think if the client is, they call me, they book an appointment, they come in and talk to me about their goal, they come in for a session, they lay down money, they want results. There's something else going on that we need to understand. And so this is what happened. Out of exasperation and not even really knowing exactly what to do, during my third session with the client, I said aloud, thank goodness something guided me to do this, I have no idea why you're not following my suggestions. There must be some reason why you're not taking in my suggestions. Now, much to my surprise, because I was never taught that a client could talk to you in hypnosis, my client started talking. So she started sharing with me a story about being 7 years old and her grandmother was in hospice and she was being taken to hospice over and over again to visit with grandma. Now, being a kid, she really didn't understand what was going on. What she saw, though, was that grandma got skinnier, and eventually died. Now, when she told me this story, I kind of put two and two together, and I realized, knowing a little bit about how the subconscious works, that because of that event, she had a belief on a subconscious level that weight loss and death were somehow linked. And here I'm telling her to eat smaller portions. Her poor subconscious was basically hearing me say to her, I'm going to kill you, you're going to die. Now, the subconscious is primarily protective. If you're giving a suggestion to the client that the subconscious, in its charming, illogical way, thinks is counterproductive or harmful for the client, they're going to reject the suggestion. So we are kind of taught, and we tend to believe, as does the general public, that being in hypnosis is enough to make the person receptive to whatever you're telling them to do. But that's actually not true. I could have done 1,000 sessions with this client on eat smaller portions, eat smaller portions. But if I didn't address the reason why she wasn't, able to take weight off, if I didn't address the fact that her subconscious thought weight loss was synonymous to death, we never would have gotten anywhere. And so it's not true that just being in hypnosis is enough. If you just get them deep and tell them what to do, they'll do it. So that first weight loss client taught me so much. It taught me that suggestions don't work if there's something else going on. We need to identify if there's some underlying reason for the client's symptoms. It also taught me that clients could speak in hypnosis. I never knew that. Up until that point, my sessions with clients have been pretty one way. The client's laying in the chair, I'm talking to them, they're just receiving. But what I learned was that the client can speak back to you. You can ask them questions and they have insight into their symptoms. I got to tell you, when I figured that out, it was such a relief. I didn't have to have all the answers. I didn't have to know what to say to the client. I didn't have to have a 10-page written out script for every hour of client time I was doing. I just needed to be able to instruct the client to go within and find the source of their symptoms, to uncover the cause, and then work them through that. It was such a relief to know it wasn't all on me. So there are some problems with how we're taught when we're taught just get them deep and give them suggestions. The first problem is it actually requires depth. And not all clients are going to go that deep. There can be many, many reasons for this. For some people, it might just be they feel a little anxious or nervous when they first come to see you. Even if they felt comfortable with you during the consultation, you had good rapport, they wanted to go ahead, they felt safe, they felt a sense of trust in you. Getting them into hypnosis is a whole other story, because now you're dealing with what their subconscious feels about you, not just what they feel about you on a conscious level. And so even if the client likes you and feels comfortable with you, once you start moving them into hypnosis, they may have some nerves come up that interfere with them going as deep. You might have noticed sometimes in a first session, this is just a bit of an aside, that sometimes the subconscious will let the person go to a certain depth, but not below that. There will be some distraction or something that occurs that keeps the client from settling in too much. Maybe they suddenly have, an itch on their face, or their bra strap feels too tight, or the room is suddenly still too warm, or they feel like they need to have a drink. All of those little distractions are the subconscious saying, no, we don't know what happens down there. We're going to hang out up here where we can kind of keep watch on everything and make sure that we're okay. So particularly if you're in a first session with a client who is new to hypnosis, if they've got that nervousness, that unfamiliarity, some anxiety around what's going to happen, they're not necessarily going to go super deep. This is also the case with a client who has difficulty with losing control, difficulty with trust, difficulty with being vulnerable. These are the kinds of things that people come to work on with us. If your client has difficulty with being vulnerable or losing control, and they perceive hypnosis as a state where they're vulnerable and they don't have control, they're not going to go that deeply into the state. Sometimes I think of the subconscious as being a little bit like a dog that's being kicked a few times. It's not just going to roll over and let us rub its belly because we've asked it to. We need to build that trust with the client, and particularly with the client's subconscious mind. And so some clients just are going to stay light because of what's going on for them, either what they're coming into work on or how they feel going into hypnosis initially. Now, it tends to be the case that the client will get deeper with every session. The first one is generally the lightest. And as they get more comfortable and you develop more rapport and they start to see results and they're feeling more safe, they'll settle in a little bit more each time. But the client also has a natural range that they will stay within. Some clients, their deep end of their range is not that deep. It's kind of a mid-range of hypnosis. So when they're light, they're really light, but when they're deep, they're just kind of mid. Other clients will go deep naturally, but only about 10% of clients are natural somnambulists, meaning only 10% of clients will go into a deep state right off the bat. So the client has a natural range that they will stay within. And that's where they're comfortable. If you're trying to push somebody who has a tendency to stay a bit lighter into those deeper levels of hypnosis, it's going to interfere with rapport. Like the client I referenced earlier, who was like, I didn't feel safe. You were trying to get me to do something that felt uncomfortable for me. We want to be working with the client. It's not, I'm doing this to you against your will. That's not a good way to build rapport. The way I do hypnosis is client-centered. The client and I are a team. We're working together to help the client accomplish their goals. I'm not doing something to them. We are working cooperatively. So I want to make sure that the client is going, to a depth of hypnosis that feels comfortable to them and not beyond that. And I'm going to talk more about that a bit later. Now, even if you do have a client who goes deep, there are some problems with working with a client who's super deep. One problem is you're limited to only being able to give suggestions. Now, a lot of the work that I'm doing with clients, I'm getting them to do some exercise inside their mind. I'm getting them to do a visualization. I'm getting them to talk to their younger selves. I'm doing some regression, which requires them to, imagine something or envision something. If you have somebody who's so deep that they're not even listening to you, not only can they not hear the instructions, they have a hard time hanging in there long enough to do them. So a client who's super deep doesn't have a whole lot of, contact with the hypnotherapist in the session. They're just kind of floating around doing their own thing, which means we can't do the deeper, more meaningful work that involves symbolism and imagery, which is the language of the subconscious mind. We're limited only to giving suggestions. Now, the conscious mind is the part of the mind that understands language. The subconscious is not the language speaking part of the mind. The subconscious is creative and emotional. It responds beautifully to symbolism, to imagery, to getting the client in touch with some emotion. So if the client is deep and we're using language, we've got them into their subconscious, but we're trying to use language to communicate them, we're kind of missing the mark. We're using a form of communication that is not natural to the subconscious. So again, this idea of get them deep and give them suggestions feels to me like a mismatch. Now, another problem with a client going super deep into hypnosis, not a huge problem, but kind of a problem, is one of the phenomena of being in a somnambulistic state is the client can have amnesia for the session. They don't recall what's happened during the session. Now, I joke that means I don't get any credit. The client goes out into the world and they get results. They're doing the things I've told them to do, but I don't know I've told them to do them. That's not really a big problem. But I do want my client to know what to look for after the session is over. Think about the client's experience. If they come in to see you and they've shared with you, that they've got anxiety and what they would like to experience instead, and maybe you have some idea about where that anxiety came from, and then you get them into hypnosis and you work on their goal, but they don't remember anything that happened during the session. And then you're like, go out and get results. Tell me what you notice. They may not know exactly what to look for. When we're dealing with anxiety, the obvious thing is they're less anxious or they don't feel anxious, but results can show up in a lot of different ways. Maybe their thinking is differently. Maybe there's longer gaps between periods of being anxious. Maybe it doesn't last as long. There could be all kinds of different results the client could be looking for, but if they don't know what happened during the session and they don't know what kind of results to look for, they may not be able to very easily track whether what we did with them worked or not. Now, there's also some problems with a client who stays a little bit light. So I said, 90% of people are not somnambulists. They'll stay a little bit lighter, particularly if they're nervous, anxious, new to hypnosis, have difficulty with being vulnerable, trusting, or losing control. Those people are going to hang out a little bit lighter. Now, some problems with that. The client might question if they're actually in hypnosis at all. Now, we typically only see hypnosis when we are watching stage hypnotism or street hypnosis. That's kind of the most visible hypnosis for the client. And those people who, are hypnotized on stage or when somebody does it to them on the street are a different suggestibility than the majority of clients who come to see me. Let me just explain that. You probably already know this, but for somebody who doesn't, this could be a good refresher maybe. So there's kind of a scale that people land on, and where they are on that scale determines what they're going to feel like in hypnosis, how they're going to respond to hypnosis. The people who are on the higher end of the scale, these are the ones who end up on stage with a stage hypnotist. They're outgoing, they're uninhibited, they're happy to be entertaining. That's why they're getting up on stage, and they'll respond to being told what to do. They'll go deep into hypnosis. These are your natural somnambulists. The other 90% of the population, and the more close to this end of the scale, the more true this is, these people are more analytical. So a person at the far end of the scale is more introverted. They're more likely to sit back and try to figure out what's going on. They don't want to be the center of attention. They don't want to be under the spotlight. They are not volunteering to get up on stage in a stage hypnosis show. These people are going to be thinking during the hypnosis. They're thinkers. They're not just going to not think because you've got them in hypnosis. But here's the problem. This is what we see, right? We see the people in the stage hypnosis show who are just dropping onto the ground or flopping over into each other's lap. So people who are not really well-versed in hypnosis think that this is what it's going to look like or feel like for them to be in hypnosis. And so if they're following along, if they're not feeling like they're going to flop over into somebody's lap, if they can hear you, if they're still thinking, they might question whether they're in hypnosis at all. If they're expecting it to be a deeper experience than it actually is, then they're going to start to wonder, am I actually there? Now, the problem with that is when a client is in a receptive state, when they're in hypnosis, they're taking in suggestions you're giving them, but they're also responding to their own thoughts. Their mind is not differentiating between the different stimuli. It's not, well, I'll take in what the hypnotist is telling me, but these thoughts, ignore them. They're responding to it all. So if you've got them in a state of hypnosis and they're light and they're expecting it to feel different, they start thinking to themselves things like, am I there? I don't think I'm in hypnosis. This is bogus. This isn't working. As soon as the client is telling themselves in a hypnotic state, this isn't working, I'm not in hypnosis, they're giving that to themselves like a hypnotic suggestion. And guess what? It pulls them out of hypnosis. And so that's one of the problems with staying light is the client might question that they're in hypnosis and actually draw themselves up as a result. They can also do the same undoing of suggestions with their thoughts when it comes to the suggestions I'm giving them around their goal. So if you've got a client who's got performance anxiety and you've got them in hypnosis and they're following along and you're just giving suggestions the way a lot of us were taught to do, you're saying you're a great performer, you feel comfortable performing, you feel at ease and confident in front of an audience. If that's what you're doing, just giving that kind of suggestion and the client's listening, what are they going to think? I'm not a good performer. I feel nervous in front of an audience. I'm terrified when I'm up there. So again, the client is countering the suggestions that you're giving them with their own thoughts. They're neutralizing what you're saying to them. If the client is simultaneously taking in, you're a great performer and I'm a terrible performer, we're not really getting anywhere in the hypnosis. So the client can question they're in hypnosis and pull themselves out, and the client can question the suggestions you're giving them and cancel them. Now, another problem with the client who is staying light, if you're just giving them suggestions, is there may be other things to address. There may be an underlying cause that needs to be dealt with before the client will get results. In the case of the weight loss client, again, I could have done 1,000 sessions on eat smaller portions, but we never would have advanced her. That wasn't what we needed to work on. She actually needed me to say, Grandma didn't die of being slim. Grandma died of an illness. You didn't understand that at the time, but that's the truth. What we're doing together, helping you to take weight off, is actually about you being healthier, not about you being unhealthy. If you feel you're more unhealthy following my suggestions, quit following them. You've already proven you don't have to follow my suggestions. Now, when I took that approach with the client, I addressed that underlying cause. I helped her subconscious to understand that what happened with Grandma is not what's going to happen with my client. These are two separate situations. Then she started taking weight off. So we need to be identifying and addressing the underlying cause of the symptom the client is coming in the majority of the cases. And so my approach, how I work with my clients and how I teach my students, is quite different from how I was trained. So instead of get them deep and give them suggestions, here's what I do. I let my client go to whatever depth they're comfortable with. Again, people have a range that they stay within. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter how deep they are. I just want them somewhere in hypnosis. I said to a client once, it's not like if you're in a swimming pool, the water is wetter in the deep end. We just want you in the pool. It doesn't matter if you're in the deep end or the shallow end, you're getting wet either way. Suggestions are accepted equally well, assuming that you're giving the right suggestions, regardless of what depth your client is at. So I let my client go to whatever depth they're comfortable with. Yes, they're in hypnosis, but it could be an alpha state, or it could be a theta state, wherever the client wants to go, whatever feels right to them. And that can vary from session to session as well. There can be a lot of different factors that influence the depth the client goes to in any given session. For example, let me just give you some, how loaded the topic is that you're covering in hypnosis. If the client knows that you're going to be dealing with a really traumatic event, some clients will stay a little bit lighter in order to make sure it's handled well, or because they have some anxiety coming up that is linked to that event. Other clients will actually go super deep because they're kind of like, I don't want to deal with this. And they just drop down even deeper. How elevated the client is when they come to see you. If the client has been rushing to see you on their lunch break, they had to drive around looking for a parking spot, they had to race 3 blocks to get to your office, watching their clock the whole time, they're already pretty elevated by the time they get to your office. It's going to take more work to get them deeper. They might stay a little lighter just because they're still in that bit of an elevated state. I'm noticing working with people online that my clients are going a lot deeper because they're already at home in their comfortable beds and they haven't been rushing to see me. So the depth can vary from session to session, even moment to moment within the same session. There's a lot of different factors that influence the depth. So I'm not concerned about how deep they are. I just want the client to go wherever they're comfortable. Now, in order to stop the client from questioning if they're in hypnosis and thereby pulling themselves out, I also prove to them that they're in hypnosis so that they don't question. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this coming up. Now, as you probably already guessed, instead of just giving suggestions and, suggesting away their symptom, I'm also working on identifying the underlying cause of their symptoms. And I do that both in the consultation and in hypnosis. Now, when I was new to hypnosis, probably 95% of the digging that I was doing for the underlying cause was actually happening in the hypnotic state. Over time, I've gotten much better at, piecing things together myself, seeing patterns, asking good questions. I've got just way more experience to draw on. So now it's probably the other way around. I'm getting probably 90% of the information that I need from the consultation. And if we get stuck, then I'm getting the rest of the information in hypnosis. Now, what do I mean by that? When the client comes in for the consultation, I want to get their theories as to what they think might be going on. I want to see if we can kind of unpack anything that may be responsible for their symptoms. What does the client think? And I'm also using what I understand about hypnosis to speculate and theorize on behalf of the client. So I'm working on, right from the time I do the consultation, identifying the cause of their symptoms. And if the client doesn't have any theories or the theories they have proved to be wrong, then I'm doing more work in hypnosis to get the information I need about why they have their symptoms. So the next piece is I am using what I call hypnotic argument to reframe the event. So again, if you have a client in a light state of hypnosis and you're saying you're a great public speaker and they're saying, no, I'm not, they're canceling out the suggestions. So I also want to find a way to reframe the belief that they have about public speaking, why they think they're a bad public speaker. Now, that can be done more easily when you know the cause of the client's symptoms. So, for example, if the client tells you during the consultation that the reason they think they're a poor public speaker is because the very first time they ever had to present in school, they got it wrong. The teacher kind of embarrassed them and they decided in that moment, I'm never doing this again, right? So this is how the subconscious works. It works by association. If public speaking gets a negative association because the first time you did it, you got embarrassed, the subconscious is going to go, we're not doing that anymore. And the person's going to have anxiety, which is really the subconscious going, get out of here. Don't do this. This is threatening. You don't want to get embarrassed again. So if I know that that's where the person's fear of public speaking or their anxiety around public speaking has come from, then I want to help the subconscious to look at that event differently. Maybe I'm pointing out the difference between where they are now versus where they were then. Maybe I'm talking about how it wasn't appropriate for the teacher to do that. And chances are, as an adult, if somebody tried to embarrass them while they were public speaking, they could put that person in their place or let it roll off them. Now they're an adult. They're no longer in a, uneven power struggle with somebody who's got more power. That statement doesn't make any sense. They're no longer dealing with a person in a position of authority that they can't speak back to. As an adult, if somebody heckled you or embarrassed you when you were doing a public speaking presentation, you could say something. You could let that person know, hey, not cool, I'm up here talking. We can't do that to the teacher when we're kids. And so by identifying the cause of the client's symptom, looking for what's responsible, now I can figure out what to say to the client while they're in hypnosis to help reverse the symptoms that they have. If I just say, you're a great public speaker, we don't get anywhere because the client can counter with, no, I'm not. But if I can point out that the people who are in the audience now are likely to be supportive, that they can speak up for themselves if somebody puts them down, that as an adult, they've got more ability to handle a situation like that. If I can help them to put that event into perspective, now when I move on to, and so therefore you'll find when you're up in front of an audience, you feel calm and confident. Now they're ready to take in the suggestions because I've dealt with that underlying event, put it into perspective, and primed them to be ready to take suggestions in. Now, I also appeal to both the conscious and subconscious mind. So if a client is lighter, their conscious mind is still hanging out. It's still paying attention. So instead of, risking that they're going to be thinking something that cancels out suggestions or questioning that they're in hypnosis, interfering with the session, I give their conscious mind something to do. The conscious mind is the part of the mind that is logical and rational and uses language. So I'm going to give that part of the mind something it can do to support the session. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more coming up. So this gives you a sense of my approach. Get them to whatever depth they're comfortable with, prove to them that they're in hypnosis, look for the cause of their symptoms, give hypnotic argument to reframe, and then give suggestions, do exercises that appeal to both the conscious and subconscious mind. And so let's get into the tips. So now that you understand my approach, let's get into some more specifics about what you do with these people based on my approach. All right. Tip number 1, prove to them that they're in hypnosis. If the client is sitting there questioning, am I in hypnosis? I don't think I'm there. They're giving that to themselves as a suggestion, and they can pull themselves out of hypnosis. So I want my client to know for absolute certain that they're in hypnosis. I want them thinking, oh, this is working. If they're thinking this is working, that reinforces that the hypnosis itself is working as well. The suggestions, the work that we're doing is going to work. So how do you prove to them that they're in hypnosis? The approach that I use in my first session with a client is to do an eye test. And if you contact me at info@horizoncenterhypnotherapy.com and ask me for the script, I'll give you some scripts for this. So with the eye test, you're basically suggesting to the client to focus on the little muscles around their eyes. Notice how nice and soft and relaxed they are. This is exactly how I do it. I don't know how much time you get in the course of a typical day to just close your eyes down and do what feels like nothing, but you can certainly enjoy having that opportunity now. It just feels like you're doing nothing because there's nothing to do physically or intellectually for the time being. But actually, in this session, a great deal is going to be accomplished. It's just that it's your deeper mind or higher mind, whichever way you look at it, that's going to be doing the work for you. And so just enjoy the sensation of eyes closed, nothing to do. In fact, and here comes the test, why don't you pretend, just privately inside your mind, that those little muscles are so soft, so relaxed, they just don't want to work at all right now. And when you know you're pretending so well that they're just not going to work, you can give them a little try, but the more you try, the more soft and relaxed they become. And when you know they're going to stay closed for now, you can let me know with a nod of your head. And then I wait. Usually what you'll see is the client does some of this, like they're trying, but nobody opens their eyes by like moving their eyelids up, their eyebrows up. That's a weird thing to do. So it's like they're following the suggestion to try, but they're failing, which is what you want the client to do. You want them to try, but discover that the eyes feel too relaxed and keep them closed. So when you successfully get the client to do an eye test, what they're thinking is, oh, something's happening. I couldn't open my eyes. Therefore, this is working. So now they're not going to question whether they're in hypnosis or whether this is going to work. Now they know, and you're able to just move on to the work you're going to do. So that would be tip number one. Prove to them that they're in hypnosis. So that's the eye test. And again, if you contact me, I've got 3 or 4 other tests that you can do in case you want some variety. Tip number 2 is to get their conscious mind to reinforce suggestions that you're giving them. So again, I don't want them to undo any of the work we're doing. I don't want to risk that their conscious mind is thinking, well, I tried that and that didn't work. Or I don't know, that doesn't sound like it's going to be so easy. As soon as the client is questioning the suggestions or questioning the work you're doing, that questioning goes into their subconscious and undoes the work. So I suggest to my client what they can do with their conscious mind to support the work that we're doing. In my very first session with a client, and I remind them of this in future sessions, I'll say something to the effect of, one of the things that I really find fascinating about hypnosis is that it works even if you're not really listening. Now, we're conditioned, particularly in school, that if somebody's speaking to us, we have to pay attention. We're going to miss important information, not know what to do, maybe get in trouble. But while we're working together, there's no rule or expectation that you listen to me. The part of your mind that you're aware of, listening or not, is your conscious mind. The subconscious is always listening. So your part's really easy. Just go to whatever place you're comfortable going. Let your mind wander, drift, dream. Let your mind just go wherever it wants to go. But if you do find yourself following along and you'd like to help out, there is something you can do. When I give you a suggestion you like the sound of, or I give you a suggestion that's a good fit for your goal, just think yes, or repeat it to yourself. Now, I say this because when a person's in hypnosis, they're taking in the suggestions I'm offering them, but they're also responding to their own thoughts as though they too were hypnotic suggestions. So if you're following anyway, we might as well use your own mind to help out. Then I also go on to mention that if there's ever a suggestion they don't like the sound of, they can either cancel it by thinking no, or they can modify it within their mind so they like the sound of it better. I like to add that on because clients are often concerned, even if I've told them they can cancel suggestions, that they have control, they're often concerned that hypnosis is going to be like, I'm going to tell them what to do and they're not going to be able to resist. I can control their minds. I know you've heard it before if you're already trained in hypnosis. So I like to let the client know that they have control over what they take in and what they reject, so they can just relax and enjoy the session and not be on guard thinking, what is she going to say to me? So that's how I get their conscious mind to reinforce suggestions. I want the client to know they're in hypnosis, and I want them to be using their mind in a way that's conducive to getting the results instead of risking that they might inadvertently cancel out a suggestion. Now, there's an analogy that I use with my clients sometimes. I call it the guard at the gate. I think of hypnosis as this. I think of the subconscious as being like a castle, and the conscious mind is the guard at the gate. And my job is to get into the castle. Now, it's okay if the guard is there, as long as the guard is letting us in, right? If the guard's standing there going, I tried that, that didn't work, I'm not going to do that, blah, 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 that's the guard blocking our entry. But if the guard is saying, that sounds good, yes, I'll do that, I like the sound of that, that's the guard allowing us in. Now, it's nice if the guard would just wander off into the, city for an hour and let us, enter the castle without him blocking the way. But if the guard is there, it's okay. We just want the guard to allow us entry. So it's all right for the client to be listening. It's okay for the client to be following, but let's use your conscious mind to support the work that we're doing, again, to, avoid the risk of them canceling out a suggestion. The next tip that I've already mentioned is identifying and addressing the cause of the client's symptom instead of just suggesting them away. And this we can do with a client who is lighter. Clients who go super deep, as I mentioned earlier, have a hard time following the plot. You're giving them instructions and they're not doing anything because they're not even listening. They're kind of cruising in and out, up and down, and, thinking about their armpit, watching the colors on the back of their eyelids, but they're not paying a whole lot of attention to what you're saying. But with a client who stays a little lighter, we can do exercises like regression or parts therapy or affect bridge to help them to identify the cause of the symptoms that they have. And because they're still in a place where they're able to interact, where they're able to follow instructions, this is a great approach with a person who's a little bit lighter because they can do it. Now, if those words, parts therapy, affect bridge, regression, are puzzling to you, you're missing something that is really important. I know there are certain schools who say, don't teach regression, it's dangerous. No, it's not if you're doing it properly. I'm happy to pass on scripts on parts therapy, affect bridge, and regression if you contact me. So that's tip number 3, identify and address the cause of their symptoms instead of just suggesting it away. Tip number 4 is to appeal to both the conscious and subconscious mind. So the way a lot of us were trained, what I think of as old-timey hypnosis, get them deep and speak to their subconscious using language. Somehow that works. If the person's lighter and they're following along, we're talking to both their subconscious and their conscious mind at the same time. Hang on. And so I'm going to use techniques for both the conscious and the subconscious. I'm kind of doing a double whammy. Instead of just suggestions or whatever for the subconscious, I'm covering both because they've got both parts of their mind following the session. So what do I mean by this? Well, the conscious mind is logical, it's rational, it's the part of the mind that uses language. And so for the conscious mind, I'm doing the reframes, the hypnotic argument, I'm giving suggestions, I'm using logic and reason to get the client to think differently. With the subconscious mind, it's a whole different story. The subconscious is creative, emotional. Therefore, it really responds to anything symbolic. It likes stories, it likes metaphors, it likes visualization, anything where the client is doing something symbolically inside their mind. And so instead of just giving suggestion to a person who is deep, which is a mismatch for what the subconscious needs, I'm appealing to both the conscious mind and the subconscious. I'm using some logic and reason and suggestions, and I'm reinforcing that work with metaphors, stories, visualizations, exercises the client can do inside their mind, symbolic things to make the same point, so that I'm doing kind of what I think of as whole brain hypnosis. I'm speaking to both conscious and subconscious. Now, my last tip is to explain to the client that depth is irrelevant. What matters is how acceptable the suggestions are. Now, again, even amongst hypnotists, there is this belief that if you're deep, you'll just take in whatever the hypnotist is telling you. No, not true. You could put somebody super deep and tell them to light their hair on fire, but because the subconscious is protective, they're going to reject that suggestion. Just like my weight loss client rejected the suggestion to eat smaller portions because the subconscious felt as though that was a threatening suggestion. Now, remember, the subconscious is illogical. It doesn't know safe from unsafe. What matters is what the subconscious thinks, not what the reality is. I was giving a good suggestion, but because of the client's previous experience, because of her experience of seeing her grandmother die in hospice, that suggestion was seen as threatening. So I'm explaining to my client that depth is irrelevant. What matters is how acceptable the suggestions are. So I'll say a person could be quite deep, but be thinking no to everything they're hearing, or the subconscious might be going, this is threatening, I don't like this suggestion, and they're going to cancel it out. They're not going to take it in. On the other hand, a person could be lighter and be thinking yes to everything they're hearing, or the subconscious is like, I like the sound of that. That's a good idea. Now they're taking it in. So what matters is not the depth. What matters is how useful, acceptable, relevant, appropriate the suggestions are. So I hope that's given you some ideas as to how to work with a person who stays a little bit lighter. And as I said, if you get in touch with me at info@horizoncenterhypnotherapy.com and ask me for those scripts, I'm happy to send them your way. Please check in again next week. I'm going to be doing this every Friday between 1 and 2 Pacific time, different topics. The topics are all going to be listed on my website, horizoncenterhypnotherapy.com. If you go to the webinar page, you'll see a calendar that has all of the topics. Click on the topic. It'll open it up and give you more information, as well as the Zoom link so you can register. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you at another one in the future. Take care.